openly declared his disbelief of this prediction. v. 2. He was a courtier whom the king had an affection for, as the man of his right hand, on whom he leaned, that is, on whose prudence he much relied, and in whom he reposed much confidence. He thought it impossible, unless God should rain corn out of the clouds, as once he did manna. No less than the repetition of Moses' miracle will serve him, though that of Elijah might have served to answer this intention, the increasing of the meal in the barrel. 3. The just doom passed upon him for his infidelity, that he should see this great plenty for this conviction, and yet not eat of it to his comfort. Note, unbelief is a sin by which men greatly dishonor and displease God, and deprive themselves of the favors he designed for them. The murmuring Israelites saw Canaan, but could not enter in because of unbelief. Such, says Bishop Patrick, will be the portion of those that believe not the promise of eternal life. They shall see it at a distance, Abraham afar off, but shall never taste of it. For they forfeit the benefit of the promise if they cannot find in their heart to take God's word. The siege of Samaria raised, 891 BC. 3. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said one to another, "Why sit we here until we die? For if we say, we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit still here, we die also. Now therefore come, and let us fall unto the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die." 5. And they rose up in the twilight to go unto the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. 6. For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots, and a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said one to another, "Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of the Hittites, and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us." 7. Wherefore they arose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents, and their horses, and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life. 8. And when these lepers came to the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent, and did eat and drink, and carried then silver, and gold, and raiment, and went and hid it, and came again, and entered into another tent, and carried thence also, and went and hid it. 9. Then they said one to another, "We do not well. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come, that we may go and tell the king's household." 10. So they came and called unto the porter of the city, and they told them, saying, "We came to the camp of the Syrians, and, behold, there was no man there, neither voice of man, but horses tied, and asses tied, and the tents as they were." 11. And he called the porters, and they told it to the king's house within. We are here told, how the siege of Samaria was raised in the evening, at the edge of night. v. 6, 7. Not by might or power, but by the Spirit of the Lord of hosts, striking terror upon the spirits of the besiegers. Here was not a sword drawn against them, not a drop of blood shed. It was not by thunder or hailstones that they were discomfited, nor were they slain, as Sennacherib's army before Jerusalem, by a destroying angel, but one. The Lord made them to hear a noise of chariots and horses. The Syrians that besieged Dothan had their sight imposed upon, ch. 6:18. These had their hearing imposed upon. For God knows how to work upon every sense, pursuant to his own counsels, as he makes the hearing ear and the seeing eye, so he makes the deaf and the blind. Exodus 4:11. Whether the noise was really made in the air by the ministry of angels, or whether it was only a sound in their ears, is not certain. Whichsoever it was from God, who both brings the wind out of his treasures, and forms the spirit of man within him. The sight of horses and chariots had encouraged the prophet's servant, ch. 6:17. The noise of horses and chariots terrified the hosts of Syria. For notices from the invisible world are either very comfortable or very dreadful, according as men are at peace with God or at war with him. 2. Hearing this noise, they concluded the king of Israel had certainly procured assistance from some foreign power. He has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians. There was for aught we know but one king of Egypt, and what kings there were of the Hittites nobody can imagine. But as they were imposed upon by that dreadful sound in their ears, so they imposed upon themselves by the interpretation they made of it. Had they supposed the king of Judah to have come with his forces, there would have been more of probability in their apprehensions than to dream of the kings of the Hittites and the Egyptians. If the fancies of any of them raised the specter, yet their reasons might soon have laid it. How could the king of Israel, who was closely besieged, hold intelligence with those distant princes? What had he to hire them with? It was impossible, but some notice would come before of the motions of so great a host. But there were they in great fear where no fear was. 3. Hereupon they all fled with incredible precipitation. As for their lives, left their camp as it was. Even their horses, that might have hastened their flight, they could not stay to take with them. 7. None of them had so much sense as to send out scouts to discover the supposed enemy, much less courage enough to face the enemy, though fatigued with a long march. The wicked flee when none pursues. God can, when he pleases, dispirit the boldest and most brave, and make the stoutest heart to tremble. Those that will not fear God he can make to fear at the shaking of a leaf. 2. How the Syrians' flight was discovered by 4 leprous men. Samaria was delivered and did not know it. The watchmen on the walls were not aware of the retreat of the enemy, so silently did they steal away. But Providence employed 4 lepers to be the intelligencers, who had their lodging without the gate, being excluded from the city, as ceremonially unclean. The Jews say they were Gehazi and his 3 sons. Perhaps Gehazi might be one of them, which might cause him to be taken notice of afterwards by the king, ch. 8:4. See here 1. How these lepers reasoned themselves into a resolution to make a visit in the night to the camp of the Syrians, v. 3:4. They were ready to perish for hunger. None passed through the gate to relieve them. Should they go into the city, there was nothing to be had there. They must die in the streets. Should they sit still, they must pine to death in their cottage. They therefore determined to go over to the enemy and throw themselves upon their mercy. If they killed them, better die by the sword than by famine, 1 death than 1,000. But perhaps they would save them alive, as objects of compassion. Common prudence will put us upon that method which may better our condition, but cannot make it worse. The prodigal son resolves to return to his father, whose displeasure he had reason to fear, rather than perish with hunger in the far country. These lepers conclude, if they kill us, we shall but die, and happy they who, in another sense, can thus speak of dying. We shall but die, that is the worst of it, not die and be damned, not be heard of the second death. According to this resolution, they went, in the beginning of the night, to the camp of the Syrians, and, to their great surprise, found it wholly deserted, not a man to be seen or heard in it. v. 5. Providence ordered it that these lepers came as soon as ever the Syrians had fled, for they fled in the twilight, the evening twilight. v. 7. And in the twilight the lepers came. v. 5. And so no time was lost. 2. How they reasoned themselves into a resolution to bring tidings of this to the city. They feasted in the first tent they came to, v. 8, and then began to think of enriching themselves with the plunder. But they corrected themselves, v. 9. We do not well to conceal these good tidings from the community we are members of, under color of being avenged upon them for excluding us from their society. It was the law that did it, not they, and therefore let us bring them the news. Though it awake them from sleep, it will be life from the dead to them. Their own consciences told them that some mischief would befall them if they acted separately and sought themselves only. Selfish, narrow-spirited people cannot expect to prosper. The most comfortable advantage is that which our brethren share with us in. According to this resolution, they returned to the gate and acquainted the sentinel with what they had discovered. v. 10. Who straightway brought the intelligence to court. v. 11. And it was not the less acceptable for being first brought by lepers. Samaria plentifully supplied, 891 BC. 12. And the king arose in the night, and said unto his servants, I will now show you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we be hungry. Therefore are they gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, saying, when they come out of the city, we shall catch them alive and get into the city. 13 And one of his servants answered and said, Let some take, I pray thee, 5 of the horses that remain, which are left in the city. Behold, they are as all the multitude of Israel that are left in it. Behold, I say, they are even as all the multitude of the Israelites that are consumed, and let us send and see. 14 They took therefore 2 chariot horses, and the king sent after the host of the Syrians, saying, Go and see. 15 And they went after them unto Jordan, and, lo, all the way was full of garments and vessels, which the Syrians had cast away in their haste. And the messengers returned and told the king. 16 And the people went out and spoiled the tents of the Syrians. So a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. 17 And the king appointed the Lord on whose hand he leaned to have the charge of the gate, and the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died, as the man of God had said, who spake when the king came down to him. 18 And it came to pass as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 measures of barley for a shekel, and a measure of fine flour for a shekel, shall be tomorrow about this time in the gate of Samaria. 19 And that Lord answered the man of God, and said, Now, behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, might such a thing be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shalt not eat thereof. 20 And so it fell out unto him, for the people trode upon him in the gate, and he died. Here we have the king's jealousy of a stratagem in the Syrians' retreat, v. 12. He feared that they had withdrawn into an ambush to draw out the besieged, that they might fall on them with more advantage. He knew he had no reason to expect that God should appear thus wonderfully for him, having forfeited his favor by his unbelief and impatience. He knew no reason the Syrians had to fly, for it does not appear that he or any of his attendants heard the noise of the chariots which the Syrians were frightened at. Let not those who, like him, are unstable in all their ways, think to receive anything from God. Nay, a guilty conscience fears the worst and makes men suspicious. 2. The course they took for their satisfaction and to prevent their falling into a snare. They sent out spies to see what had become of the Syrians, and found they had all fled indeed, commanders as well as common soldiers. They could track them by the garments which they threw off, and left by the way, for their greater expedition, v. 15. He that gave this advice seems to have been very sensible of the deplorable condition the people were in, v. 13. For speaking of the horses, many of which were dead, and the rest ready to perish for hunger, he says, and repeats it, There is all the multitude of Israel. Israel used to glory in their multitude, but now they are diminished and brought low. He advised to send 5 horsemen, but it should seem there were only 2 horses fit to be sent, and those chariot horses, v. 14. Now the Lord repented himself concerning his servants, when he saw that their strength was gone. Dut 32:36. 3. The plenty that was in Samaria, from the plunder of the camp of the Syrians, v. 16. Had the Syrians been governed by the modern policies of war, when they could not take their baggage and their tents with them, they would rather have burnt them, as it is common to do with the forage of a country, than let them fall into their enemies' hands. But God determined that the besieging of Samaria, which was intended for its ruin, should turn to its advantage, and that Israel should now be enriched with the spoil of the Syrians as of old with that of the Egyptians. Here see 1. The wealth of the sinner laid up for the just, Job 27:16, 17, and the spoilers spoiled, Isa 33:1. 2. The wants of Israel supplied in a way that they little thought of, which should encourage us to depend upon the power and goodness of God in our greatest straits. 3. The word of Elisha fulfilled to a tittle. A measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel. Those that spoiled the camp had not only enough to supply themselves with, but an overplus to sell at an easy rate for the benefit of others. And so even those that tarried at home did divide the spoil. PS 68:12, Isa 33:23. God's promise may be safely relied on, for no word of his shall fall to the ground. 4. The death of the unbelieving courtier that questioned the truth of Elisha's word. Divine threatenings will as surely be accomplished as divine promises. He that believeth not shall be damned stands as firm as he that believeth shall be saved. This Lord, one, was preferred by the king to the charge of the gate. v. 17, to keep the peace and to see that there was no tumult or disorder in dividing and disposing of the spoil. So much trust did the king repose in him, in his prudence and gravity, and so much did he delight to honor him. He that will be great, let him serve the public. 2. Was trodden to death by the people in the gate, either by accident, the crowd being exceedingly great, and he in the thickest of it, or perhaps designedly, because he abused his power, and was imperious in restraining the people from satisfying their hunger. However it was, God's justice was glorified, and the word of Elisha was fulfilled. He saw the plenty, for the silencing and shaming of his unbelief, corn cheap without opening windows in heaven, and therein saw his own folly in prescribing to God. But he did not eat of the plenty he saw. When he was about to fill his belly, God cast the fury of his wrath upon him. Job 20:23, and it came between the cup and the lip. Justly are those thus tantalized with the world's promises that think themselves tantalized with the promises of God. If believing shall not be seeing, seeing shall not be enjoying. This matter is repeated, and the event very particularly compared with the prediction, v. 18-20, that we might take special notice of it and might learn, 1. How deeply God resents our distrust of him, of his power, providence, and promise. When Israel said, "Can God furnish a table?" the Lord heard it and was wroth. Infinite wisdom will not be limited by our folly. God never promises the end without knowing where to provide the means. 2. How uncertain life and the enjoyments of it are. Honor and power cannot secure men from sudden and inglorious deaths. He whom the king leaned upon the people trod upon. He who fancied himself the stay and support of the government was trampled under foot as the mire in the streets. Thus hath the pride of men's glory been often stained. 3. How certain God's threatenings are, and how sure to alight on the guilty and obnoxious heads. Let all men fear before the great God, who treads upon princes as mortar, and is terrible to the kings of the earth. Chapter 8. The passages of story recorded in this chapter oblige us to look back. We read before of a Shunammite woman that was a kind benefactor to Elisha. Now here we are told how she fared the better for it, afterwards, in the advice Elisha gave her, and the favor the king showed her for his sake. Verse 1-6. 2. We read before of the designation of Hazael to be king of Syria, 1 Kings 19:15, and here we have an account of his elevation to that throne and the way he forced for himself to it, by killing his master, verse 7-15. 3. We read before of Jehoram's reigning over Judah in the room of his father Jehoshaphat, 1 Kings 22:50. Now here we have a short and sad history of his short and wicked reign, verse 16-24, and the beginning of the history of the reign of his son Ahaziah, verse 25-29. A famine in Israel, the Shunammite's possessions restored, 886 BC. 1 Then spake Elisha unto the woman, whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise, and go thou and thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn. For the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. 2 And the woman arose, and did after the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household, and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. 3 And it came to pass at the 7 years' end, that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines, and she went forth to cry unto the king for her house and for her land. 4 And the king talked with Gehazi the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. 5 And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that, behold, the woman, whose son he had restored to life, cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. 6 And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed unto her a certain officer, saying, Restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now. Here we have the The wickedness of Israel punished with a long famine, one of God's sore judgments often threatened in the law. Canaan, that fruitful land, was turned into barrenness for the iniquity of those that dwelt therein. The famine in Samaria was soon relieved by the raising of that siege, but neither that judgment nor that mercy had a due influence upon them, and therefore the Lord called for another famine, for when he judgeth he will overcome. If less judgments do not prevail to bring men to repentance, he will send greater and longer. They are at his beck, and will come when he calls for them. He does, by his ministers, call for reformation and obedience, and, if those calls be not regarded, we may expect he will call for some plague or other, for he will be heard. This famine continued 7 years, as long again as that in Elijah's time, for if men will walk contrary to him, he will heat the furnace yet hotter. 2. The kindness of the good Shunammite to the prophet rewarded by the care that was taken of her in that famine. She was not indeed fed by miracle, as the widow of Sarepta was, but 1. She had notice given her of this famine before it came, that she might provide accordingly, and was directed to remove to some other country. Anywhere but in Israel she would find plenty. It was a great advantage to Egypt in Joseph's time that they had notice of the famine before it came, so it was to this Shunammite. Others would be forced to remove at last, after they had long borne the grievances of the famine and had wasted their substance, and could not settle elsewhere upon such good terms as she might that went early, before the crowd, and took her stock with her unbroken. It is our happiness to foresee an evil, and our wisdom, when we foresee it, to hide ourselves. 2. Providence gave her a comfortable settlement in the land of the Philistines, who, though subdued by David, yet were not wholly rooted out. It seems the famine was peculiar to the land of Israel, and other countries that joined close to them had plenty at the same time, which plainly showed the immediate hand of God in it, as in the plagues of Egypt. When they distinguished between the Israelites and the Egyptians, and that the sins of Israel, against whom this judgment was directly leveled, were more provoking to God than the sins of their neighbors, because of their profession of relation to God. You only have I known, therefore will I punish you. Amos 3:2. Other countries had rain when they had none, were free from locusts and caterpillars when they were eaten up with them. For some think this was the famine spoken of, Joel 1:3-4. It is strange that when there was plenty in the neighboring countries, there were not those that made it their business to import corn into the land of Israel, which might have prevented the inhabitants from removing, but as they were befooled with their idolatries. So they were infatuated even in the matters of their civil interest. 3. Her petition to the king at her return, favored by the seasonableness of her application to him. 1. When the famine was over, she returned out of the land of the Philistines. That was no proper place for an Israelite to dwell any longer than there was a necessity for so doing. For there she could not keep her new moons and her Sabbaths as she used to do in her own country, among the schools of the prophets. Ch. 4:23. 2. At her return she found herself kept out of the possession of her own estate, it being either confiscated to the exchequer, seized by the Lord, or usurped in her absence by some of the neighbors. Or perhaps the person she had entrusted with the management of it proved false, and would neither resign it to her nor come to an account with her for the profits. So hard is it to find a person that one can put a confidence in a time of trouble. Prov 25:19, Mike 7:5. 3. She made her application to the king himself for redress. 4. It seems, be it observed to his praise, he was easy of access, and did himself take cognizance of the complaint of his injured subjects. Time was when she dwelt so securely among her own people that she had no occasion to be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host, Ch. 4:13, but now her own familiar friends, in whom she trusted, proved so unjust and unkind that she was glad to appeal to the king against them. Such uncertainty there is in the creature that may fail us which we most depend upon, and that befriend us which we think we shall never need. 4. She found the king talking with Gehazi about Elisha's miracles, v4. It was his shame that he needed now to be informed concerning them, when he might have acquainted himself with them as they were done from Elisha himself, if he had not been willing to shut his eyes against the convincing evidence of his mission. Yet it was his praise that he was now better disposed, and would rather talk with a leper that was capable of giving a good account of them than continue ignorant of them. The law did not forbid all conversation with lepers, but only dwelling with them. There being then no priests in Israel, perhaps the king, or someone appointed by him, had the inspection of lepers and passed the judgment upon them, which might bring him acquainted with Gehazi. 5. This happy coincidence befriended both Gehazi's narrative and her petition. Providence is to be acknowledged in ordering the circumstances of events, for sometimes those that are minute in themselves prove of great consequence, as this did. 4:1. It made the king ready to believe Gehazi's narrative when it was thus confirmed by the persons most nearly concerned. This is the woman, and this her son. Let them speak for themselves. v. 5. Thus did God even force him to believe what he might have had some color to question if he had only had Gehazi's word for it, because he was branded for a liar. Witness his leprosy. 2. It made him ready to grant her request. For who would not be ready to favor one whom heaven had thus favored, and to support a life which was given once and again by miracle? In consideration of this, the king gave orders that her land should be restored to her and all the profits that were made of it in her absence. If it was to himself that the land and profits had achieved, it was generous and kind to make so full a restitution. He would not, as Pharaoh did in Joseph's time, enrich the crown by the calamities of his subjects. If it was by some other person that her property was invaded, it was an act of justice in the king, and part of the duty of his place, to give her redress. PS 82:3. 4. Prov 31:9. It is not enough for those in authority that they do no wrong themselves, but they must support the right of those that are wronged. Hazael's barbarity predicted. 885 BC. 7. And Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad the king of Syria was sick, and it was told him, saying, The man of God is come hither. 8. And the king said unto Hazael, Take a present in thine hand, and go, meet the man of God, and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? 9. So Hazael went to meet him, and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels' burden, and came and stood before him, and said, Thy son Ben-Hadad king of Syria hath sent me to thee, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? 10. And Elisha said unto him, Go, say unto him, Thou mayest certainly recover, howbeit the Lord hath showed me that he shall surely die. 11. And he settled his countenance steadfastly, until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. 12. And Hazael said, Why weepeth my Lord? And he answered, Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel. Their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, and their young men wilt thou slay with the sword, and wilt dash their children, and rip up their women with child. 13. And Hazael said, But what? Is thy servant a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elisha answered, The Lord hath showed me that thou shalt be king over Syria. 14. So he departed from Elisha, and came to his master, who said to him, What said Elisha to thee? And he answered, He told me that thou shouldest surely recover. 15. And it came to pass on the morrow, that he took a thick cloth, and dipped it in water, and spread it on his face, so that he died, and Hazael reigned in his stead. Here we may inquire what brought Elisha to Damascus, the chief city of Syria. Was he sent to any but the lost sheep of the house of Israel? It seems he was. Perhaps he went to pay a visit to Naaman his convert, and to confirm him in his choice of the true religion, which was the more needful now because, it should seem, he was not out of his place, for Hazael is supposed to be captain of that host. Either he resigned it or was turned out of it, because he would not bow, or not bow heartily, in the house of Rimmon. Some think he went to Damascus upon account of the famine, or rather he went thither in obedience to the orders God gave Elijah. 1 Kings 19:15, Go to Damascus to anoint Hazael, thou or thy successor. 2. We may observe that Ben-Hadad, a great king, rich and mighty, lay sick. No honor, wealth, or power will secure men from the common diseases and disasters of human life. Palaces and thrones lie as open to the arrests of sickness and death as the meanest cottage. 3. We may wonder that the king of Syria, in his sickness, should make Elisha his oracle. 1. Notice was soon brought him that the man of God, for by that title he was well known in Syria since he cured Naaman, had come to Damascus. V. 7. Never in better time, says Ben-Hadad. Go and inquire of the Lord by him. In his health he bowed in the house of Rimmon, but now that he is sick he distrusts his idol, and sends to inquire of the God of Israel. Affliction brings those to God who in their prosperity had made light of him. Sometimes sickness opens men's eyes and rectifies their mistakes. This is the more observable one, because it was not long since a king of Israel had, in his sickness, sent to inquire of the God of Ekron, ch. 1:2, as if there had been no God in Israel. Note, God sometimes fetches to himself that honor from strangers which is denied him and alienated from him by his own professing people. 2. Because it was not long since this Ben-Hadad had sent a great force to treat Elisha as an enemy, ch. 6:14, yet now he courts him as a prophet. Note, among other instances of the change of men's minds by sickness and affliction, this is one, that it often gives them other thoughts of God's ministers and teaches them to value the counsels and prayers of those whom they had hated and despised. 2. To put an honor upon the prophet. 1. He sends to him, and does not send for him, as if, with the centurion, he thought himself not worthy that the man of God should come under his roof. 2. He sends to him by Hazael, his prime minister of state, and not by a common messenger. It is no disparagement to the greatest of men to attend the prophets of the Lord. Hazael must go and meet him at a place where he had appointed a meeting with his friends. 3. He sends him a noble present of every good thing of Damascus, as much as loaded 40 camels, v. 9, testifying hereby his affection to the prophet, bidding him welcome to Damascus, and providing for his sustenance while he sojourned there. It is probable that Elisha accepted it. Why should he not, though he refused Naaman's? 4. He orders Hazael to call him his son Ben-Hadad, conforming to the language of Israel, who called the prophets fathers. 5. He puts an honor upon him as one acquainted with the secrets of heaven, when he inquires of him, "Shall I recover?" It is natural to us to desire to know things to come in time, while things to come in eternity are little thought of or inquired after. For what passed between Hazael and Elisha is especially remarkable. 1. Elisha answered his inquiry concerning the king, that he might recover. The disease was not mortal, but that he should die another way. V. 10. Not a natural, but a violent death. There are many ways out of the world, and sometimes, while men think to avoid one, they fall by another. 2. He looked Hazael in the face with an unusual concern, till he made Hazael blush and himself weep. V. 11. The man of God could outface the man of war. It was not in Hazael's countenance that Elisha read what he would do, but God did, at this time, reveal it to him, and it fetched tears from his eyes. The more foresight men have, the more grief they are liable to. 3. When Hazael asked him why he wept, he told him what a great deal of mischief he foresaw he would do to the Israel of God. V. 12. What desolations he would make of their strongholds, and barbarous destruction of their men, women, and children. The sins of Israel provoked God to give them up into the hands of their cruel enemies, yet Elisha wept to think that ever Israelites should be thus abused. For, though he foretold, he did not desire the woeful day. See what havoc war makes, what havoc sin makes, and how the nature of man is changed by the fall, and stripped even of humanity itself. 4. Hazael was greatly surprised at this prediction. V. 13. What, says he, is thy servant a dog, that he should do this great thing? This great thing he looks upon to be 1. An act of great power, not to be done but by a crowned head. It must be some mighty potentate that can think to prevail thus against Israel, and therefore not I. Many are raised to that dominion which they never thought of, and it often proves to their own hurt. Eccle 8:9. 2. An act of great barbarity, which could not be done but by one lost to all honor and virtue. Therefore, says he, it is what I shall never find in my heart to be guilty of. Is thy servant a dog, to rend, and tear, and devour? Unless I were a dog, I could not do it. See here. 1. What a bad opinion he had of the sin. He looked upon it to be great wickedness, fitter for a brute, for a beast of prey, to do than a man. Note, It is possible for a wicked man, under the convictions and restraints of natural conscience, to express great abhorrence of a sin, and yet afterwards to be well reconciled to it. 2. What a good opinion he had of himself, how much better than he deserved. He thought it impossible he should do such barbarous things as the prophet foresaw. Note, we are apt to think ourselves sufficiently armed against those sins which yet we are afterwards overcome by, as Peter, Matt 26:35. 5. In answer to this, Elisha only told him he should be king over Syria. Then he would have power to do it, and then he would find in his heart to do it. Honors change men's tempers and manners, and seldom for the better. Thou knowest not what thou wilt do when thou comest to be king, but I tell thee this thou wilt do. Those that are little and low in the world cannot imagine how strong the temptations of power and prosperity are, and, if ever they arrive at them, they will find how deceitful their hearts were, and how much worse than they suspected. What mischief Hazael did to his master hereupon. If he took any occasion to do it from what Elisha had said, the fault was in him, not in the word. 1. He basely cheated his master, and belied the prophet. 14. He told me thou shouldst certainly recover. This was abominably false. He told him he should die. 10. But he unfairly and unfaithfully concealed that, either because he was loath to put the king out of humor with bad news, or because hereby he might the more effectually carry on that bloody design which he conceived when he was told he should be his successor. The devil ruins men by telling them they shall certainly recover and do well, so rocking them asleep in security, than which nothing is more fatal. This was an injury to the king, who lost the benefit of this warning to prepare for death, and an injury to Elisha, who would be counted a false prophet. 2. He barbarously murdered his master, and so made good the prophet's word. 15. He dipped a thick cloth in cold water, and spread it upon his face, under pretense of cooling and refreshing him, but so that it stopped his breath, and stifled him presently, he being weak, and not able to help himself, or perhaps asleep. Such a bubble is the life of the greatest of men, and so much exposed are princes to violence. Hazael, who was Ben-Hadad's confidant, was his murderer, and, some think, was not suspected, nor did the truth ever come out, but by the pen of this inspired historian. We found this haughty monarch, 1 Kings 20, the terror of the mighty in the land of the living, but he goes down slain to the pit with his iniquity upon his bones. Ezek 32:27. The reign of Jehoram, 884 BC. 16. And in the 5th year of Joram the son of Ahab king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then king of Judah, Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat king of Judah began to reign. 1730, and 2 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. 18. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. 19. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David his servant's sake, as he promised him to give him alway a light, and to his children. 20. In his days Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah, and made a king over themselves. 21. So Joram went over to Zair, and all the chariots with him, and he rose by night, and smote the Edomites which compassed him about, and the captains of the chariots, and the people fled into their tents. 22. Yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day. Then Linah revolted at the same time. 23. And the rest of the acts of Joram, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? 24. And Joram slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his stead. We have here a brief account of the life and reign of Jehoram, or Joram, one of the worst of the kings of Judah, but the son and successor of Jehoshaphat, one of the best. Note 1. Parents cannot give grace to their children. Many that have themselves been godly have had the grief and shame of seeing those that came forth out of their bowels wicked and vile. Let not the families that are thus afflicted think it strange. 2. If the children of good parents prove wicked, commonly they are worse than others. The unclean spirit brings in 7 others more wicked than himself. Luke 11:26. 3. A nation is sometimes justly punished with the miseries of a bad reign for not improving the blessings and advantages of a good one. Concerning this Jehoram observe I, the general idea here given of his wickedness, v. 18 he did as the house of Ahab, and worse he could not do. His character is taken from the bad example he followed, for men are according to the company they converse with and the copies they write after. No mistake is more fatal to young people than a mistake in the choice of those whom they would recommend themselves to and take their measures from, and whose good opinion they value themselves by. Jehoram chose the house of Ahab for his pattern rather than his father's house, and this choice was his ruin. We have a particular account of his wickedness. 2 Chron 21. Murder, idolatry, persecution, everything that was bad. 2. The occasions of his wickedness. His father was a very good man, and no doubt took care to have him taught the good knowledge of the Lord. But 1. It is certain he did ill to marry him to the daughter of Ahab. No good could come of an alliance with an idolatrous family, but all mischief with such a daughter of such a mother as Athaliah the daughter of Jezebel. The degeneracy of the old world took rise from the unequal yoking of professors with profane. Those that are ill-matched are already half-ruined. 2. Idadi did not do well to make him king in his own lifetime. It is said here, v. 16, that he began to reign, Jehoshaphat being then king. Hereby he gratified his pride, than which nothing is more pernicious to young people, indulged him in his ambition, in hopes to reform him by humoring him, and so brought a curse upon his family, as Eli did, whose sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. Jehoshaphat had made this wicked son of his viceroy once, when he went with Ahab to Ramoth-Gilead, from which Jehoshaphat's 17th year, 1 Kings 22:51, is made Jehoram's second, 2 Kings 1:17, but afterwards, in his 22nd year, he made him partner in his government, and thence Joram's 8 years are to be dated, 3 years before his father's death. It has been hurtful to many young men to come too soon to their estates. Samuel got nothing by making his sons judges. 3. The rebukes of providence which he was under for his wickedness. 1. The Edomites revolted, who had been under the government of the kings of Judah ever since David's time, about 150 years, v. 20. He attempted to reduce them, and gave them a defeat, v. 21, but he could not improve the advantage he had got, so as to recover his dominion over them. Yet Edom revolted, v. 22, and the Edomites were, after this, bitter enemies to the Jews, as appears by the prophecy of Obadiah and PS 137:7. Now Isaac's prophecy was fulfilled, that this Esau the elder should serve Jacob the younger. Yet, in process of time, he should break that yoke from off his neck. Gen 27:40. 2. Linah revolted. This was a city in Judah, in the heart of his country, a priest's city. The inhabitants of this city shook off his government because he had forsaken God, and would have compelled them to do so too. 2 Chron 21:10-11. In order that they might preserve their religion, they set up for a free state. Perhaps other cities did the same. 3. His reign was short. God cut him off in the midst of his days, when he was but 40 years old, and had reigned but 8 years. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. 4. The gracious care of providence for the keeping up of the kingdom of Judah and the house of David, notwithstanding the apostasies and calamities of Jehoram's reign. v. 19. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah. He could easily have done it. He might justly have done it. It would have been no loss to him to have done it. Yet he would not do it, for David's sake, not for the sake of any merit of his which could challenge this favor to his family as a debt, but for the sake of a promise made to him that he should always have a lamp, that is, a succession of kings from one generation to another, by which his name should be kept bright and illustrious, as a lamp is kept burning by a constant fresh supply of oil, that his family should never be extinct till it terminated in the Messiah, that son of David on whom was to be hung all the glory of his father's house, and in whose everlasting kingdom that promise to David is fulfilled. PS 132:17, I have ordained a lamp for my anointed. v. The conclusion of this impious and inglorious reign. v. 23:24. Nothing peculiar is here said of him, but we are told, 2 Chron 21:19-20, that he died of sore diseases and died without being desired. The reign of Ahaziah, 884 BC. 25 in the 12th year of Joram the son of Ahab king of Israel did Ahaziah the son of Jehoram king of Judah begin to reign. 26 and 20 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri king of Israel. 27 And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. 28 And he went with Joram the son of Ahab to the war against Hazael king of Syria in Ramoth-Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Joram. 29 And King Joram went back to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him at Ramah, when he fought against Hazael king of Syria. And Ahaziah the son of Jehoram king of Judah went down to see Joram the son of Ahab in Jezreel, because he was sick. As among common persons there are some that we call little men, who make no figure, are little regarded, as less valued, so among kings there are some whom, in comparison with others, we may call little kings. This Ahaziah was one of these. He looks mean in the history, and in God's account vile, because wicked. It is too plain an evidence of the affinity between Jehoshaphat and Ahab that they had the same names in their families at the same time, in which, we may suppose, they designed to complement one another. Ahab had 2 sons, Ahaziah and Jehoram, who reigned successively. Jehoshaphat had a son and grandson named Jehoram and Ahaziah, who, in like manner, reigned successively. Names indeed do not make natures, but it was a bad omen to Jehoshaphat's family to borrow names from Ahab's, or, if he lent the names to that wretched family, he could not communicate with them the devotion of their significations. Ahaziah, taking hold of the Lord, and Jehoram, the Lord exalted. Ahaziah king of Israel had reigned but 2 years. Ahaziah king of Judah reigned but 1. We are here told that his relation to Ahab's family was the occasion, 1, of his wickedness. 27 He walked in the way of the house of Ahab, that idolatrous bloody house, for his mother was Ahab's daughter. 26 So that he sucked in wickedness with his milk. Partus sequitur ventrem, the child may be expected to resemble the mother. When men choose wives for themselves, they must remember they are choosing mothers for their children, and are concerned to choose accordingly. 2 Of his fall. Joram, his mother's brother, courted him to join with him for the recovery of Ramoth-Gilead, an attempt fatal to Ahab. So it was to Joram his son, for in that expedition he was wounded. 28 And returned to Jezreel to be cured, leaving his army there in possession of the place. Ahaziah likewise returned, but went to Jezreel to see how Jehoram did. 29 Providence so ordered it that he who had been debauched by the house of Ahab might be cut off with them when the measure of their iniquity was full, as we shall find in the next chapter. Those who partake with sinners in their sins must expect to partake with them in their plagues. Chapter 9 Hazael and Jehu were the men that were designed to be the instruments of God's justice in punishing and destroying the house of Ahab. Elijah was told to appoint them to this service, but upon Ahab's humiliation, a reprieve was granted, and so it was left to Elisha to appoint them. Hazael's elevation to the throne of Syria we read of in the foregoing chapter, and we must now attend Jehu to the throne of Israel. For him that escapeth the sword of Hazael, as Joram and Ahaziah did, Jehu must slay, of which this chapter gives us an account. A commission is sent to Jehu by the hand of one of the prophets, to take upon him the government, and destroy the house of Ahab, for 1 to 10. 2. Here is his speedy execution of this commission. 1. He communicates it to his captains, verse 11 to 15. 2. He marches directly to Jezreel, verse 16 to 20, and their dispatches. 1. Joram king of Israel, verse 21 to 26. 2. Ahaziah king of Judah, verse 27 to 29. 3. Jezebel, verse 30 to 37. Jehu anointed king, 884 BC. 1 And Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets, and said unto him, Gird up thy loins, and take this box of oil in thine hand, and go to Ramoth-Gilead. 2 And when thou comest thither, look out there Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat the son of Nimshi, and go in, and make him arise up from among his brethren, and carry him to an inner chamber. 3 then take the box of oil and pour it on his head, and say, Thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door and flee and tarry not. For so the young man, even the young man the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. 5 And when he came, behold, the captains of the host were sitting. And he said, I have an errand to thee, O captain. And Jehu said, Unto which of all us? And he said, To thee, O captain. 6 And he arose, and went into the house, and he poured the oil on his head, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. 7 And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord, at the hand of Jezebel. 8 For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. 9 And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. 10 And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. We have here the anointing of Jehu to be king, who was, at this time, a commander, probably commander-in-chief, of the forces employed at Ramoth Gilead, v. 14. There he was fighting for the king his master, but received orders from a higher king to fight against him. It does not appear that Jehu aimed at the government, or that he ever thought of it, but the commission given him was a perfect surprise to him. Some think that he had been anointed before by Elijah, whom God ordered to do it, but privately, and with an intimation that he must not act till further orders, as Samuel anointed David long before he was to come to the throne. But that it not at all probable, for then we must suppose Elijah had anointed Hazael too. No, when God bade him do these things, he bade him anoint Elisha to be prophet in his room, to do them when he was gone, as God should direct him. Here is the commission sent. 1. Elisha did not go himself to anoint Jehu, because he was old and unfit for such a journey, and so well known that he could not do it privately, could not go and come without observation. Therefore he sends one of the sons of the prophets to do it, v. 1. They not only reverences him as their father, ch. 2:15, but observed and obeyed him as their father. This service of anointing Jehu, 1, had danger in it, 1 Sam 16:2, and therefore it was not fit that Elisha should expose himself, but one of the sons of the prophets, whose life was of less value, and who could do it with less danger. 2. It required labor, and was therefore fitter for a young man in his full strength. Let youth work and age direct. 3. Yet it was an honorable piece of service, to anoint a king, and he that did it might hope to be preferred for it afterwards, and therefore, for the encouragement of the young prophets, Elisha employed one of them. He would not engross all the honors to himself, nor grudge the young prophets a share in them. 2. When he sent him, 1. He put the oil into his hand with which he must anoint Jehu. Take this box of oil. Solomon was anointed with oil out of the tabernacle. 1 Kings 1:39. That could not now be had, but oil from a prophet's hand was equivalent to oil out of God's house.